Nearly 1 billion people on this planet live in slums and informal settlements, mostly in developing countries. These people are acutely vulnerable. They're typically more exposed to climate hazards, but they're also living in extremely precarious locations with low quality housing, very limited, almost negligible hazard reducing infrastructure, and also with a very limited capacity to cope. That is why we need to focus on the urban poor.
In support of the Secretary General's call for greater climate action, UN Habitat is renewing our commitments to reducing inequalities within places and within cities and communities.
Our challenge today is that every city must have a resilience strategy. And the urban poor, who are very vulnerable and face the consequences of climatic incidences the most, have to be at the center.
Whether it's from profiling, diagnosis, to planning, to implementation, to monitoring, the poor and their communities must be at the center of any adaptation process.
This will begin with community enumeration. Communities will validate maps of urban poverty hotspots from satellite images. They will also validate downscaled scientific climate projection data. The initiative will therefore include both top-down and bottom-up information flows.
The worst thing that can happen to well-prepared and well-intentioned projects is that to sit on a shelf and gather dust. To avoid that outcome, our approach is to push the implementation phase back up into the planning phase of the project, so that as evidence-based planning proceeds and viable projects drop out, they can begin to be implemented on their own, even as more complex, probably more expensive infrastructure projects continue in preparation.
Very often, engineers, architects, urban designers, urban professionals default to conventional solutions. They need to be much more aware of climate and informality. They need to be much more aware of new sustainability and resilient design standards. Only then will we see innovation and sustainability in urban design with an eye on climate.
For those living informally, their habitat and their livelihoods, all within the informality in the city, are the first to get impacted by any kind of crisis, whether man-made, which is like evictions, or by various climate incidences.
The IPCC report went into a lot of detail into what community groups and community-based adaptation can do. But it also showed it can't be successful unless it engages with citywide infrastructure, with citywide systems for making sure that people are involved in decision making, and that there's linkages between what's done at a neighbourhood level and what's being done at a city level.
When national governments take the urban poor into account in doing national adaptation planning, they demonstrate a stronger commitment to resilience. Only when you look at the formal sector and the informal sector do you get the complete picture of the shocks and stresses that cities face today.
Whether it's in the Pacific, Asia, Europe, or here in Africa, the cost of adaptation are similarly staggering. But we know the cost of inaction are far greater. Many vulnerable economies are only one severe weather event away from complete decimation.
We must recognize that individual states cannot by themselves mitigate the threat of climate change. International cooperation, shared responsibilities, solidarity if we are to combat climate change and build climate resilience.
By emphasizing the importance of community-based action that are backed by citywide planning and relevant national policies, this initiative will help ensure that no one and no place is left behind in our collective battle for our planet's survival and our children's future. Thank you.